A historic day in Riyadh. The sun rose over Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, on June 4, 2025, casting a warm golden glow across the city's modern skyline of glass towers and palm-lined streets. Inside a sleek, air-conditioned conference hall, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Leaders from across the globe, presidents, prime ministers, business tycoons, and diplomats filled the room, their voices a low hum of excitement. At the center stood President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, a small West African nation often overlooked by global powers. Traoré, a tall man in his early 50s with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, adjusted his dark suit and prepared to deliver a speech that could change history. He wasn't here to beg for aid or plead for favors. He was here to propose a partnership that could reshape Africa's future and inspire the world. The hall was a vibrant mix of cultures. Delegates from Nigeria, Senegal, Ethiopia, Europe, Asia, and the Americas sat in neat rows, their aides scribbling notes or tapping on tablets. The summit, billed as a discussion on global economic cooperation, was a high-stakes event, and all eyes were on the keynote speakers. Among them was the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, a leader known for his bold vision and commanding presence. Dressed in flowing white robes, he entered the hall with quiet confidence, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Traoré. The two men had met briefly before, at a trade summit in Dubai 2 years earlier, but today felt different. The stakes were higher, the moment heavier. The Crown Prince approached Traoré, stopping close enough for their conversation to feel personal, though the packed room strained to hear every word. "Mr. President," the Crown Prince said, his voice steady and warm, "your Trans-Sahel infrastructure corridor is exactly the kind of bold idea Saudi Arabia wants to support. We don't see Africa as a charity case. We see it as a partner, ready to build a brighter economic future for the world." The room fell silent. Traoré stood tall, his heart racing beneath his composed exterior. He had spent months preparing for this moment, working late into the night with his advisors in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital. The Trans-Sahel infrastructure corridor was his vision, a massive network of roads, railways, power lines, and internet cables stretching across the Sahel region, connecting countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Chad, and beyond. It wasn't just about building infrastructure, it was about creating jobs, boosting trade, and proving that Africa could lead its own development with dignity. For Traoré, this was personal. He had grown up in a small village, watching his parents struggle to sell their crops due to poor roads. He knew what a project like this could mean for millions of Africans. The Crown Prince turned to the audience, his voice carrying authority. "Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund will commit $500 million to the first phase of the Trans-Sahel corridor," he announced. "We'll provide more funding as the project meets its goals and other nations join in." Gasps rippled through the hall. A Nigerian delegate, a seasoned diplomat named Chukwu, dropped his pen, his eyes wide with surprise. A Senegalese minister, Awandai, leaned forward, whispering urgently to her aide. This wasn't just a financial pledge, it was a seismic shift. Saudi Arabia, one of the world's wealthiest nations, was treating an African country as an equal partner, not a recipient of handouts. For many in the room, it was a moment they never thought they'd witness, but the Crown Prince had more to say. "We're also establishing a permanent African Partnership Office in Riyadh," he continued. "Its mission will be to find and develop opportunities for cooperation between Saudi Arabia and African nations. President Traoré, I'd like you to chair its advisory board." The offer was historic. African leaders were rarely invited to shape Saudi policy. In the past, they'd been summoned to Riyadh for ceremonial visits or to request loans, often leaving with promises that came with conditions. This was different. It was an invitation to lead, to sit at the table as equals, to help design a new model of global partnership. Traoré nodded, his expression steady but his eyes alive with emotion. "Your Highness," he replied, his voice clear and deliberate. "This partnership will mark a turning point. It's the moment the global South starts working together, not competing. Wealth should create more wealth for everyone, not just pile up in one place." His words were simple but powerful, cutting through years of diplomatic jargon. They spoke to a truth that resonated with everyone in the room. The world needed a new way of working together, one based on respect and shared goals. The Crown Prince smiled, a rare, genuine smile that showed he understood the weight of the moment. "Mr. President, I believe you're absolutely right," he said. "This partnership will benefit our nations more than we can imagine today. It's the start of something truly transformative." The room erupted in polite applause, but the real energy was in the glances exchanged between delegates, the hurried notes passed between aides, and the sense that something historic had just begun. The aftermath. A world transformed. As the formal session ended, the hall buzzed with activity. African delegates swarmed Traoré, their voices urgent and excited. "How can Nigeria join the corridor?" asked Chukwu, the Nigerian diplomat, his notebook already open. "Can Senegal link its ports to this network?" pressed Awan Diaye, her eyes bright with possibility. Leaders from Ethiopia and South Africa saw opportunities to connect their economies to the Sahel, creating a continental network that could rival any in the world. European and American diplomats, meanwhile, huddled in corners, their faces tense. They whispered about what this Saudi-African alliance meant for their influence on the continent. Would it shift the balance of power? Would it challenge their long-standing relationships with African governments? In a quiet corner of the hall, a French diplomat named Pierre Dubois muttered to his American counterpart, Sarah Thompson, "This could change everything. If Saudi Arabia starts funding African infrastructure on this scale, where does that leave us?" Sarah nodded, her brow furrowed. "It's not just the money," she replied. "It's the message. They're treating Africa as an equal. That's something we've struggled to do." Their conversation reflected a growing unease among Western powers who had long dominated African development through aid and loans. Later, as the hall began to clear, the Crown Prince pulled Traoré aside for a private conversation. The cameras were gone, and the room was quieter now, with only a few aides lingering nearby. "Your presentation today wasn't just impressive," the Crown Prince said softly, his tone sincere. "It was necessary. You've shown us what a true partnership looks like, not just deals and contracts, but trust, respect, and shared goals." Traoré nodded, his voice steady but warm. "Your Highness, Burkina Faso has learned that dignity is worth more than charity. Partnership is stronger than handouts. Today, we prove that can work in practice, not just in speeches." They shook hands, not as diplomats following protocol, but as allies starting something bigger than themselves. That handshake felt like the beginning of a new era, one where nations could work together based on mutual respect, not power imbalances. It was a moment that would echo far beyond the walls of the conference hall. News of the partnership spread like wildfire. By evening, African stock markets were surging. In Nairobi, Lagos, and Addis Ababa, traders scrambled to buy shares in construction firms, logistics companies, and energy providers. In Ouagadougou, the Burkina Faso Stock Exchange saw its busiest day in years, with small businesses linked to the corridor attracting new capital. Investors saw the potential of Saudi-backed infrastructure to transform the continent's economies. In Lagos, a young stockbroker named Temi told her clients, This is the biggest opportunity we've seen in a decade. The Sahel is about to become a hub of trade. Her words echoed the excitement felt across the continent. Social media exploded with excitement. Young Africans shared clips of Traoré's speech, their captions brimming with pride. "This is what leadership looks like," tweeted Aisha, a 19-year-old student in Ghana. "Burkina Faso just showed the world we're not begging anymore," posted Kwame, a young entrepreneur in Kenya. In Nigeria, a viral video showed a group of teenagers reenacting Traoré's handshake with the Crown Prince, laughing as they mimicked his calm confidence. Hashtags like Duntran Sahel, Africa Rising, and Lineage Partnership Not Pity trended across the continent, uniting people in a shared sense of possibility. In South Africa, a popular influencer named Thandi posted a video saying, "This is our time. Africa isn't just a place, it's a force." International media jumped on the story. Western outlets like CNN, the BBC, and the New York Times focused on the geopolitical implications. Headlines read, "Saudi Arabia's African Gambit, a threat to Western influence," and Trans-Sahel Corridor, will it redraw Africa's economic map? Analysts speculated about how the partnership might challenge Europe and America's long-standing dominance in African affairs. Chinese media, wary of competition, noted that the corridor could complicate their Belt and Road initiative, which had poured billions into African infrastructure. Middle Eastern papers like Al Jazeera and Gulf News celebrated Saudi Arabia's growing role as a global leader. "The kingdom steps up," declared a headline in Dubai, accompanied by a photo of Traoré and the Crown Prince shaking hands. Within 48 hours, African leaders were reaching out to both Saudi Arabia and Burkina Faso. The president of Senegal, Fatou Diop, a charismatic leader with a reputation for bold economic reforms, called Traoré to discuss linking Dar es Salaam to the corridor. "This could transform our ports," she said, her voice crackling with excitement over the phone. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Tesfaye, a pragmatic economist, asked about integrating Chinese-built railways with the new network. "We have infrastructure in place," he told Saudi officials. "Let's make it work together." South Africa's president, Thabo Mokoena, representing a more developed economy, explored ways to contribute expertise in logistics and renewable energy. These weren't just polite gestures or diplomatic niceties. They were serious, urgent inquiries from leaders who saw a new model for global cooperation, one where African nations could lead, not follow. Back home, a nation inspired. In Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital, the reaction was electric. Crowds gathered in homes, cafes, and public squares, glued to radios and TVs. For a nation used to being ignored or patronized by the world's powers, seeing their president treated as an equal by Saudi Arabia was a source of immense pride. A market vendor named Aisha, her hands calloused from years of selling yams, told a local reporter, "I've never seen our country treated like this. It's like the world is finally listening." Her words captured the mood of a nation that had long felt invisible on the global stage. At the University of Ouagadougou, students organized watch parties to replay Traoré's speech. The campus buzzed with energy as young people debated what the partnership meant for their future. Issa, a 20-year-old engineering student, stood in a crowded lecture hall, his voice rising with passion. "This makes me believe I can build something big for my country one day," he said. "If President Traoré can stand up to the world, so can we." His classmates cheered, their optimism infectious. Across the city, billboards began appearing, with slogans like "Burkina Faso, building the future," and "Partnership, not pity." In rural villages, community leaders held meetings to explain the corridor's potential, sparking hope in places that had known only hardship. In a small village called Gango, a 10-year-old boy named Musa watched the news with his mother, Awa. Their home was simple, made of mud bricks with a tin roof, but tonight it felt alive with possibility. Awa, a farmer who had struggled to sell, her crops due to poor roads, listened as the radio described Traoré's speech. "This is for us," she told Musa, her voice trembling with hope. "This road will change our lives." Musa, clutching a notebook where he sketched bridges and buildings, nodded. "I want to be an engineer," he said. "I want to build things like the president." His dream was small but powerful, a spark that would grow with the corridor. But Traoré stayed grounded. He knew a handshake in Riyadh was just the start. Back in Ouagadougou, he faced a packed press conference, the room filled with journalists from across Africa and beyond. "A promise means nothing if we can't deliver," he told them, his voice firm. "Partnerships are about results, not words. We have to prove this can work in Africa, for Africans." His words were a call to action, not celebration. He wasn't interested in basking in the moment. He wanted to build something lasting, turning vision into reality. To make the Trans-Sahel corridor real, Burkina Faso set up the Trans-Sahel Coordination Office in Ouagadougou. The office was a modest, two-story building on a bustling street, but it buzzed with purpose. Inside, Saudi engineers in crisp shirts worked alongside Burkinabe officials in traditional boubou, poring over maps, blueprints and spreadsheets. Their goal was ambitious: turn the corridor from a concept into a working network of roads, railways, power, lines and internet cables within 5 years. The project wasn't just about connecting cities. It was about creating jobs, boosting trade, and showing the world what African-led development could achieve. The office was led by Amina Diallo, a 32-year-old engineer from Ouagadougou. Amina had studied civil engineering in France, but returned to Burkina Faso to make a difference. She was fierce and focused, with a knack for turning complex plans into reality. "This isn't just about building roads," she told her team during their first meeting. "It's about building hope. Every bridge we design, every power line we install, is a step toward a better future for our people." Her team, a mix of young African graduates and seasoned Saudi experts, nodded in agreement. They knew the stakes were high. Amina's right-hand man was Kofi Traoré, a 28-year-old engineer from Mali who had grown up in a village much like Gango. Kofi had seen firsthand how poor infrastructure trapped communities in poverty. "I used to walk 3 hours to school because there were no roads," he told Amina one evening, as they reviewed plans late into the night. "This project is personal for me." Amina nodded, understanding his drive. Together, they led a team that included economists, architects, and community organizers, all working to ensure the corridor served the people it was meant to help. Within 3 months, the partnership was in motion. Saudi engineers arrived in the Sahel, their laptops loaded with satellite imagery and geological data. They conducted studies to map out the best routes for roads and railways, navigating the region's sandy plains and rocky hills. Construction companies from Riyadh and Jeddah bid on contracts to build bridges, lay asphalt, and install power grids. Saudi banks set up ties with African financial institutions, making it easier to fund local businesses. In Ouagadougou, the National Bank of Burkina Faso opened a new department to handle transactions with Saudi partners, hiring dozens of young accountants and analysts. But this wasn't a one-way street. The partnership was built on equality, not dependence. African engineers like Amina and Kofi worked side by side with Saudi experts, learning advanced techniques in construction and project management. African economists like Moussa Traoré, a 28-year-old graduate from Dakar, helped plan the project's finances, ensuring it benefited local communities. Local companies got priority for contracts, from laying asphalt to supplying cement and steel, In Mali, a small construction firm run by a woman named Fatoumata won a contract to build a 50-kilometer stretch of road. "This is our chance to shine," she told her workers, her voice brimming with pride. This approach was a departure from the past. For decades, African development relied on aid from former colonial powers like France and Britain, or loans from emerging powers like China. Those relationships often felt unequal, with African nations cast as junior partners or recipients of charity. The Saudi partnership was different. It treated African nations as equals, building on their strengths, labor, resources and local knowledge, while combining them with Saudi money and expertise. It wasn't about one country helping another. It was about working together to create something bigger than either could achieve alone. A ripple effect across Africa. The partnership's focus on equality had a ripple effect. In Burkina Faso, young people began to see their country differently. They weren't just a nation receiving help, they were a nation building its own future. In Ouagadougou, a group of high school students launched a club called Future Builders, inspired by the corridor. They met weekly to discuss engineering, economics, and how Africa could lead in the 21st century. Their teacher, Madame Caboret, beamed with pride. "These kids are dreaming bigger than ever before," she said. "They see what's possible now." Across the continent, universities launched new programs on South-South cooperation, teaching students how developing countries could work together without relying on Western aid or Chinese loans. In Nairobi, the University of Kenya introduced a course called Global South Partnerships, which drew hundreds of students. In Accra, a think tank published a report titled Beyond Aid, a New Model for African Development, citing the Saudi-Burkina Faso partnership as a case study. The idea of the Global South as a united force was taking root, inspiring a generation to think differently about their place in the world. In Lagos, Nigeria, a young entrepreneur named Temi launched a startup to supply solar panels for the corridor's power grids. "This project showed me that Africa can lead," she told her team, as they worked late into the night to meet a deadline. In Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, a group of students at Addis Ababa University started a podcast called Africa Rising, discussing how the corridor could inspire new models of development. In Cape Town, South Africa, a community organization began training women to start businesses along the corridor, from food stalls to tech services. These initiatives were small but powerful, showing how the partnership was sparking change at every level. 6 months after the Riyadh meeting, the Trans-Sahel Corridor broke ground. The ceremony was held in a dusty field in northern Burkina Faso, near the border with Mali. It was deliberately modest, with no international dignitaries or lavish displays. Instead, Traoré invited local leaders, workers, and community members. Kofi, the young engineer from Mali, stood proudly with his team, his hard hat gleaming in the sun. Traoré's speech was short but powerful. "Today, we're not just building a road. We're building a new way for nations to work together. We're proving that partnership is stronger than handouts, and dignity is worth more than charity." The crowd cheered, their voices carrying across the open field. Among them was Mariam, a farmer from a nearby village. She had traveled hours to attend, bringing her 2 children to witness the moment. "This road will change everything," she told a reporter, her eyes shining. "I'll be able to sell my crops in bigger markets. My kids will have a future." Her words captured the project's promise. It wasn't just about infrastructure, but about opportunity and hope, transforming lives and economies. The project moved faster than anyone expected. Saudi technical expertise, combined with African labor and resources, produced results. By the end of the first year, the corridor was ahead of schedule and under budget. Roads were taking shape, winding through the Sahel's sandy plains and connecting remote villages to larger markets. Power lines, brought electricity to communities that had relied on kerosene lamps for generations. Internet cables, buried alongside the roads, promised to bring high-speed connectivity to areas that had been digitally isolated. In Gango, Musa's village, the changes were tangible. Musa, now 11, studied under an electric light for the first time, his notebook filled with sketches of bridges and buildings. His mother, Awa, was a farmer who had struggled to make ends meet. Now, with the new road nearby, she could sell her millet and sorghum in cities across the border. "This road is a blessing," she told her neighbors, her voice filled with gratitude. Musa's teacher, Madame Diallo, noticed a change in him. "He's always been bright," she said, "but now he's dreaming bigger. He wants to build the next corridor." The economic impact was undeniable. Trade between Africa and Saudi Arabia grew by 60% in a single year. New businesses sprang up along the corridor. Small shops selling snacks to truck drivers, logistics companies transporting goods, and tech startups building apps to track shipments. In Mali, Fatoumata's catering business, which fed construction workers, grew from a small kitchen to a company with 20 employees. "I started with one pot and a dream," she told a local TV station. "Now I'm feeding the people building our future." In Niger, a young man named Ibrahim launched a logistics firm to move goods along the new roads, hiring dozens of drivers and mechanics. These weren't just jobs. They were opportunities to build skills, independence, and a sense of pride. The partnership's real power was in how it changed mindsets. Young Africans began to see international relations differently. They realized they could shape their own future, not just accept what wealthier nations offered. In schools across the continent, students debated new models of cooperation. At the University of Lagos, a professor named Dr. Okoye told her students, "This is our moment. The global South is proving it can lead, not follow." Her words echoed in classrooms from Cape Town to Cairo, inspiring a generation to think bigger. A global movement. The partnership inspired others to follow suit. Brazil began talks with Nigeria about joint infrastructure projects, focusing on renewable energy and agriculture. India deepened its ties with East African tech hubs, funding startups in Kenya and Uganda. Mexico signed trade deals with North African manufacturers, focusing on solar panels and wind turbines. The Saudi African model was spreading, creating a web of partnerships across the global South. These weren't just economic deals. They were a new way of thinking about global cooperation, one based on mutual respect and shared goals. A year after the Riyadh meeting, the Crown Prince spoke at an event marking the partnership's first anniversary. The event was held in Jeddah with delegates from across Africa in attendance. President Traoré didn't ask us to solve Africa's problems, the Crown Prince said, his voice resonating through the hall. He invited us to join Africa's solutions. That invitation changed. Delegates from across Africa in attendance. President Traoré didn't ask us to solve Africa's problems, the Crown Prince said, his voice resonating through the hall. He invited us to join Africa's solutions. That invitation changed. Not just our relationship with Africa, but how we see partnership itself. His words were met with applause, but they also carried a deeper truth. The world was changing, and the old model of rich countries giving aid to poor ones was fading. In its place was a new model, where developing nations worked together as equals. Traoré, as always, stayed focused on results. When asked about his role in the partnership's success, he brushed off praise. "This isn't about one person," he said, standing before a crowd in Ouagadougou. "It's about truth, mutual benefit, and respect. Those principles can work anywhere, if leaders are brave enough to try." His humility only added to his influence. Across Africa, leaders began citing him as an example of what was possible when you demanded respect instead of hoping for sympathy. The Trans-Sahel corridor continued to grow. By its second year, it was more than a road, it was a lifeline. New schools opened in connected communities, giving children like Musa a chance to learn. Hospitals gained access to reliable power, allowing doctors to perform surgeries at night. Farmers like Mariam could sell their goods across borders, boosting their incomes. In Burkina Faso, Mariam's small export business grew, and she hired her neighbors to help package millet and sorghum for markets in Saudi Arabia. "I never thought I'd see this day," she told a local newspaper, her smile wide. "We're not just surviving, we're thriving." A new model for the world. The partnership's success wasn't just in what it built, but in how it inspired others. In a speech to the United Nations, Traoré summed it up. "The global South doesn't need to be rescued. We need partners who believe in our potential. Together, we can write a new story of development, one where dignity and partnership are the foundation." His words sparked debates in capitals around the world. From Brasilia to New Delhi, diplomats and scholars began to see the Saudi-African partnership as a model for the future, one that could replace the old system of aid and dependency. In Gango, Musa's village, the changes were tangible. The electric light that lit his studies was a symbol of something bigger. It was proof that Africa could lead its own future. Musa, now 11, carried a notebook filled with sketches of bridges, roads, and buildings. "I want to build things like President Traoré," he told his teacher, his eyes bright with ambition. His dream wasn't just about engineering, it was about being part of a continent that was redefining its place in the world. Across Africa, young people like Musa began to see their continent differently. They saw it as a place of opportunity, not a place that needed saving. In Nigeria, a group of students launched a startup to design solar-powered charging stations for the corridor. In Kenya, a young woman named Wanjiku opened a coding academy to train programmers for the digital economy. In South Africa, a community group started a cooperative to supply materials for the corridor's construction. These were the seeds of a new Africa, planted by a partnership that valued dignity over charity. The world took notice. In Brazil, a senator proposed a global South Summit to bring together leaders from Africa, Latin America, and Asia. In India, the government launched a fund to support African tech startups, inspired by the corridor's success. In Mexico, a trade delegation visited Morocco to explore new partnerships in renewable energy. The Saudi-African model was no longer just a project, it was a movement, reshaping how nations thought about cooperation, a legacy for the future. 2 years after the Riyadh meeting, the Trans-Sahel corridor was a symbol of what was possible when nations worked as equals. It had created thousands of jobs, connected millions of people, and inspired a new generation to dream big. In Ouagadougou, President Traoré walked through the Trans-Sahel Coordination Office, now a bustling hub of activity. He stopped to talk with Amina, the young engineer who had become a key leader in the project. "You're making us proud," he told her, his voice warm. Amina smiled, her hands stained with ink from hours of drafting plans. "We're just getting started, Mr. President," she replied. In Riyadh, the Crown Prince met with his advisors to discuss the next phase of the partnership. "This is only the beginning," he told them. "Africa is showing us what's possible when we trust each other. Let's keep building." His words were a commitment to a future where the global South led, not followed. In Gango, Musa sat under his electric light, sketching a new design for a solar-powered school. His mother, Awa, watched him with pride. "You'll build great things one day," she said, her voice soft. Musa looked up, his eyes bright. "I'm already building them, Mama," he said. "I'm building them in my mind." The partnership between Saudi Arabia and Burkina Faso had started with one man's refusal to beg for charity. It had grown into a movement that reshaped the global South. It proved that dignity and cooperation could achieve more than aid ever could. As the Trans-Sahel corridor continued to grow, its legacy was clear. A new model for the world, one where nations worked together as equals, building a future that belonged to all of them.